Hi, I'm Levi Cornelson, and this is the D&D Playstyle Part 4. It is the fourth video in a series about the basic playstyle that the text of D&D prompts, and which players often create variations around, and about how the text does that. If you haven't seen the first three videos, I'm sorry to tell you that this one probably won't make a lot of sense to you. I will link those in the description for you, and they are all in a playlist on my channel. In this video specifically, I'll be talking a bit more about the gravity of rules, what that means, and how it helps push a default playstyle. So here's another picture, just to keep the conversation inside the paradigm so far. What we're adding right now is the rules that we don't use in play. The characters in your game won't cast every spell in the book. They won't use all of the physical and all of the combat rules unless someone is playing a grappler, in which case I'm so sorry, and so on. There's a lot of stuff you're not going to be using. Stick a pin in that. We'll be right back to it. Let's say that the metaphorical shape of the actual gameplay in your game is this. Nice equal amounts of action of each type. There's lots of magic, lots of physical action, lots of mental action, and lots of social action. And let's say that the metaphorical shape of the text, the book, looks like this when you include all of the rules that aren't being used. Now, if you remember from the very beginning of the series, clear rules, mechanics, procedures, I'm saying that they attract attention. This is because they provide a feeling of stability by being clear and written down. Players are often happy to personally invest in them and imagine them in use. A player whose character has an 18 strength will want to see that pay off in play somehow now and again. They can get invested in it. They feel like that's a solid thing to put their time and energy into imagining use for. Players will also look to the rules that aren't being used as a potential source for where to go next. You level up, and you'll get more of the stuff that's designed for your character into play, onto the table. Players get invested in the future of their character as described by the mechanics, and reminded of that investment and that future every time they advance a level. In turn, this gets them more invested in the mechanics. So that cycle of activity creates that gravity towards the rules. Gameplay is pulled towards the shape of the rules. Sometimes gently, sometimes heavily, depending on who's invested in what, how much sway the numbers happen to have on them, things like that. In the case of these shapes, that's probably not going to be a big deal. If the group is engaged by the material, they can absolutely defy this kind of level of gravity with no problem at all. The engagement by the material, the fiction of play, and the narrative of what's going on will need to keep pace with the lure of mechanical advancement. It'll need to keep engaging them over and over because the mechanics will each time that they gain a level or look to the future of their character. But what if the campaign is intended to be about courtly intrigue, mysteries, the occasional duel, and only very subtle magic out in the corners? Okay, so in this case, the gravity of the rules is firmly against you. The stuff the book is trying to get your players excited about, and the stuff that they need to be excited about to work with your premise, are very different things. Not only that, but the way the mechanics are balanced, to the extent that they are balanced, is going to get pulled deeply out of whack. In this courtly intrigue game, the chances are charisma will be far more valuable per point than intelligence and wisdom, and that those in turn will be more valuable in strength, dexterity, and constitution. The bard will likely be an obviously better class than the fighter, and you probably won't want any wizards or sorcerers or anything like that in there at all. An enormous amount of the text is going to be left out of the gameplay unused, exerting gravity on nothing. This doesn't mean you can't do this and have it work. You can, if you have a sufficiently well-loaded 3-ring binder to shift the gravity with house rules, or if you can overwhelm that gravity by engaging the players totally in your narrative, in your setting, and in other fictions, so they just don't feel the pull of that gravity. But that's not the default playstyle of the text, and that is what we're talking about here. The default playstyle of the text is where the gravity takes you. In the case of you changing the shape of the game with house rules, often you need to accept that you and your sources deserve the credit for your awesome 3-ring binder game that's only nominally D&D, and the text of the book doesn't. In the case where you engage your players so hard that they don't feel the gravity at all, you don't really need to worry about what game you're playing in any case. You can just embrace your virtuosity as an entertainer. Now, this kind of thing is why people say, stop using D&D for everything. It's not good for that. And that's not untrue. But while it is more work to run a differently shaped game than the system holds, doing that work isn't tragic. If you're having a great time doing it, that's great. But it does mean that simply by the numbers, many of the best tabletop RPG designers in the world are almost certainly running what are actually primarily 3-ring binder games, and calling what they're doing D&D, and not crediting themselves for their work. And that's a shame. With all of that said, we now have all of the pieces in hand for me to finish laying out the default playstyle for D&D, which is what the series promises. So I'll see you in part 5 to conclude that.